Good, good evening. My name is Shalonda Graham, and I'm with the Office of Family Engagement. Thank you to our co-video chat this evening, post-secondary education, life after high school. Today, we have the Special Education Department. We have our director, Iristina Reed, who will be coming to us and introducing our speaker on this evening. Also on the chat, we do have our family engagement facilitators for the different quads. If they can just raise their hands and waves for the sake of time and say hello. We have our admin who is here, who does an excellent job of connecting us all. I want to say thank you and welcome to you all for joining us on this evening. Um, just some social norms to go over. If you would continue to keep your microphones muted, and if you do have questions or comments, please place them in the chat, and we'll be sure to ask them as the presentation is going along, and we'll get your questions answered. So without further ado, go ahead and hand it over to you. Thank you, Director Iristina.
Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us again tonight for part two. So we were together last Tuesday and had an opportunity to hear from Christine O'Brien for post-secondary training, and she will be presenting part two. Tonight we will wrap up right around 5:45 with any questions and leaving a few minutes for questions so that we can end in a timely fashion. So without further ado, Christine O'Brien.
Thanks, Iristina. Thanks, everybody. So yes, this is kind of part two. Last week, we went through what does transition planning look like? What are the responsibilities for students, parents, and the school district in post-secondary transition planning starting at age 15. And tonight, we're going to talk about the different diploma and credential options available for students with, well, all students and students with disabilities who have safety nets available to them. So I'm going to kind of get right into the presentation. I think most of you already have been on our call, so you kind of know who I am. Again, I'm with a New York State Ed funded program called the School Age Family and Community Engagement Center. Our work is really driven by the blueprint for improved results for students with disabilities that's been in existence forever, but officially on paper and in existence to school districts and educational organizations since 2015. And we're really going to be focusing a lot tonight on the family partnership and the transition support as we're looking at all of the different multiple pathways that students can achieve their local or Regents diploma. So again, I'm Christine O'Brien. I am a professional in the field, but I am also a mom of a child who is exiting high school, or graduating hopefully high school this year and moving on into the adult world. So as many of you know, I shared a lot of stories last week, and I'm sure I'll share some more today. Shalondra, said it great. So if you could all just please mute your microphones just so we don't have feedback. If you have questions, Shalondra is great about checking the chat box, but feel free to unmute if you want to. And as Iristina said, I will go for about 35 minutes or so. I know it's almost 10 after. And then we'll open it up to questions for me or for any of the people at your school district as well. So tonight, and again, this is really just an overview for you guys tonight. I know I shared with you last week, and I'll make sure you have the link again. Typically, to go in depth into this training, it's about a good 2 hours. So I'm really just giving you kind of the overview of the diploma and credential options. And if you wanted more in-depth information, as family members or teachers, you can always reach out to me or the Regional Partnership Center, and you could always attend one of our longer trainings to get more in-depth information. I'm going to go through the different requirements in New York State for all students to achieve a high school diploma. If you remember, and I've said this so many times, our kiddos that have IEPs or 504s are general education students first. So they follow all of the same guidelines and credit requirements that all students do. Our kids just happen to have that IEP that helps level the playing field for them because they have a disability that impacts their education. So we're going to talk about those credit requirements. Iristina has a ton of resources that I shared with her that she'll send out to you guys as far as different documents that you can refer back to that I'll refer to tonight. We're going to talk about multiple pathways to diplomas. We're going to talk about the appeals process. We're going to talk about safety nets for Regents Regents exams, specifically for students with IEPs. And then we're going to talk briefly at the end about the two exiting credentials. One called the CDOS, or the Career Development Occupational Studies Commencement Credential, that some of you might have been hearing that word CDOS. I've talked about it a lot with you. And then the Skills and Achievement Commencement Credential. Okay, so in New York State, in order for students to achieve a diploma, there are credit requirements for the class, and then there are certain assessment requirements attached to that class. Specifically, Regents exams or maybe district approved exams for certain other classes that students may take. So this is giving you an overview, and this is one of the handouts that you will have. So don't worry about frantically writing down, because you will get the handouts. But all students, including our students with IEPs, need to go through the credit requirements as prescribed by New York State Ed. And I'm just going to show them here to you, but pretty much what that looks like is 22 credits and electives. And that encompasses English, social studies, science, math, world languages, which used to be called LOTE, L-O-T-E, language other than English, and now that's called world languages. When I was in school, it was called a foreign language. So it's gone through a lot of different names, and students only need 1 credit in that. I know when I was in high school back in the 80s, I needed 4 years of that. We have visual arts, music, dance, physical education is a requirement, health, and then 3.5 electives, which is great because students can choose electives based on, I've always heard me say that word SPIN, their strengths, preference, interest, and needs. One of the things I want you to keep in mind is for students with disabilities, some students may be exempt from that world language credit. So it's 1 credit, or that language other than English. And I'm going to use those words interchangeably because world languages just started the wording in New York State regulations about 8 months ago. So a lot of documents that you'll see will still say LOTE, L-O-T-E, language other than English. One of the things that I would just want to make sure everybody knows, so students that have a disability, if the disability impacts them in regards to maybe reading or comprehension or languages, they may be exempt from that foreign language. If they take that foreign language exemption, they need to make up that credit somewhere else because that credit is in the 22 credits, okay? So I just wanted to keep that in mind. So here is an example of the multiple pathways to graduating. Many of you, if you graduated in New York State and received a Regents diploma, probably remember you had to take math, English, science, and 2 social studies Regents for your standard Regents diploma. So now what happens in New York State, all students, not students with not just students with disabilities, but all students have what's called the 4+1 multiple pathway. And what that means is students still have to take all of those 22 credits and electives, and then they have to pass a total of 5 exams, 4 of them being Regents exams that are associated with 1 math, 1 English, 1 science, and 1 social studies. Then the student can choose a pathway that you'll see here on the right-hand side of your screen. So the STEM pathway is science, technology, engineering, and math. So students who have a strength in science or math may take an additional Regents exam in science or math to earn their Regents diploma. Humanities would be additional English, or if they did take that 5th social studies. There are pathways in arts, and I know that I was just on a call today with some of the counselors at Henniger, and they were talking about different art pathways, and that's something that might be an opportunity for some of your students. The language other than English, or again, it may be called world languages, and that would be if a student chose to take 4 years of a world language. CTE would be if your students are involved in career and technical education programs there within Syracuse City. That would be their pathway. So they would have to pass that final exam, which isn't a Regents exam, but that final exam in their CTE course. And then there's the CDOS commencement credential. And we're going to talk about how students can earn that CDOS commencement credential. And that can also be a pathway to graduation. So These pathways that you see, the +1 on the right-hand side, are taking the place of one of the social studies regions. It doesn't take the place of the class. The students still need to earn the credits for that class. But if they don't pass both social studies regions and they were working on a different pathway, they can still obtain their high school diploma. Okay, so again, types of diplomas. We have the local diploma, and the local diploma is what students with disabilities would achieve as a diploma if they had to use some of the safety nets that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. Okay, so that's still taking all of those classes, those 22 credits and electives prescribed by New York State Ed, passing the classes. But if the student is using any of the safety net appeals that we're going to discuss, they would achieve a local diploma. So they're still taking the Regents courses, but they don't necessarily have to achieve that 65 as a passing grade on the final Regents exam. Now, also our students, because they are general education students first, so our students with IEPs or 504s can be working towards that Regents seal endorsement on their diploma, as long as they get a 65 or better on the Regents exams. And then of course we have the Regents with advanced designation, where students do need to achieve that 65 on 7+1 Regents exams. So there's more classes that they have to take and more Regents exams that they take for that advanced designation diploma. So again, just looking here, traditionally, in order to achieve a Regents diploma, students need to score a 65 on ELA, math, science, one of the social studies, and then one of the pathways. So that's what you'll see here. Okay. So there is something called the appeals process for a Regents exam, a final Regents exam. So again, typically students need to achieve a 65 to be considered a passing grade for a Regents exam. If the student has taken the Regents exam twice, so they have to sit for it twice, and they scored between a 60 and a 64. So let me just highlight that for you for a quick second here, if I can. So this 60 to 64, okay? That student could appeal that grade as long as they've taken the exam twice. They have to also take advantage of academic help provided by the school. So you may have at any of the schools, with any of the high schools within Syracuse City, you may have extra classes to prepare for the algebra regions, to prepare for the global regions. Students may take go to some of those Regents prep classes, or they may stay after school for certain periods with those teachers to help get academic support. It doesn't mean that the student is getting academic support at home through a tutor. It has to be through the school district. So again, parents, if that's something you're doing with your student to have them, have a tutor at home, that's great. I'm not telling you to stop that, but they have to demonstrate that they got additional academic support in that subject area provided by the school. They have to also have passed the class. So they have to have earned the credits for the class. It's just that they scored between a 60 and 64 on that Regents exam, and they're asking for the appeal. Now, if a student appeals one Regents exam between that 60 and 64, they are still awarded a Regents endorsed diploma. If a student appeals two Regents exams, which is the maximum that they can appeal, then that student who does not have an IEP would actually receive a local diploma. So if any student appeals one exam, it's a Regents diploma. If they appeal two exams, they would now receive the local diploma. So that's a way that a general education student who does not have an IEP could achieve a local diploma, because they appealed two exams, two Regents exams. We're going to talk in a minute about the safety nets and what the safety nets are for students with disabilities to achieve a local diploma. And then you also have your English language learners. If they're seeking an appeal for just that ELA, that appeal is between a 55 and a 59 to achieve a local diploma. And that is strictly just for your English language learners. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the safety nets now for a minute. So there are safety nets in place that if a student cannot score a 65 on those Regents exams, and it's a student who has an active IEP. So the safety nets are available specifically for students with an individualized education program. Nowhere in that paper does it need to say they're eligible for the safety nets. They automatically have the safety nets. If you have a child with a 504 accommodation plan, their 504 plan must state in the plan that they have the safety nets available to them. If they were a student that was declassified from special education in or after 8th grade, their declassification letter would have to state that they have the safety nets eligible to them. Okay, so that's how a student with a 504 or a student that was declassified from an IEP could still have the safety nets. But if your child has an IEP, they automatically have the safety nets that I'm about to review next. Okay, so there's 3 different types of safety nets. The first one is called the low pass option. So you'll see that right here. The low pass option is exactly what you read here. Student can score a 55 on any of those Regents exams. So as long as they've passed the class, so they've earned the credit for the class, if they can't achieve a 65 on the Regents exam, a 55 is considered a passing grade for a student with a disability to achieve a local diploma. So that's the first safety net, the low pass option. The second safety net is the appeals. So I'm going to go to that for a minute. Okay. So here is the low pass option. The student would score a 55 on all of their Regents exams. Now, if the student has chosen a pathway, let's say for CTE, they have to pass that final exam. These safety nets are only in place for Regents exams. Okay, so the appeals process. This slide is identical to the slide I just reviewed with you, but for students with disabilities to achieve a local diploma, they can appeal 52, 53, 54. Okay, so again, local diploma, student with an IEP has to score a 55 on the Regents exams, but they could appeal a 52, a 53, or a 54 on up to 2 Regents exams. All of the same criteria holds true. They have to have taken the the Regents exam twice and failed. They have to have academic support in the class. They have to be passing the class, and then they are recommended to the committee, the appeals committee. And that committee within your school district is made of multiple people. So it's not just one person's decision if that appeal should be granted. So for a local diploma, for a student with a disability, they can appeal up to 2 Regents exams where they received a 52, 53, or 54 and still graduate with a local diploma. So that's the appeals process based on that 55 low pass. Okay, I'm going to stop just for a quick minute and see if anybody has any questions on the safety nets up to this point.
I don't see any questions in the chat at this time.
All right, great. I'll keep going. Excellent.
All right.
Okay. The third safety net is something called a compensatory safety net. And we're going to do an example of this because this one, honestly, when I first read it from the state years and years ago, I had to read the memo about 16 times and ask a bunch of questions before it really resonated with me. So this is, in fact, compensating a passing grade of 65 or better for a grade of 45 to 54. So for example, let's say a student scores a 68 on their math Regents, they could compensate for global that they got a 48 on. So they're taking a passing grade and compensating for a grade where they didn't pass. So if they scored between a 45 and a 54 on anything except ELA and math, they can compensate that grade for something that they achieved what the state considers a passing grade of 65. So don't worry, I'm going to go through an example that's going to make this seem a little bit easier. So let me just give you the highlights of it, and then I'm going to show you if this, then this. So in order to use the compensatory safety net, again, same thing, IEP 504 declassification, but the student does have to achieve at least a 55 on math and ELA, or they can appeal that down to a 52. The nice thing about the safety nets is we can use all of the safety nets combined together to help the student achieve a diploma. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. Oh, I forgot that I have those little, okay, so let me go. We've already reviewed that. Okay, so here's my example. This is we're going to make the assumption with this student that they have passed all of the required classes they need to pass. And now we're looking at their Regents exam scores, because again, the safety nets are for Regents exams, not district approved exams, not other state approved exams for certain pathways, but if the student is looking at a Regents exam. So in this particular case, this student achieved a 55 on English, a 62 on math, 46 on global, 64 on science, and US history and government was a 68. So the first thing we want to look at is, did this student get a 65 or better on anything? And then we look here, and in actuality, they received a 68 on their US history and government. So we know if we need to compensate for anything, we have that passing grade at 65 or better. Okay, now we can also look and say, okay, we know that students can score that low pass option of a 55. So in fact, here is the low pass option, low pass option, low pass option, and this was they passed, right? Sorry, that's supposed to be a P. Okay, so we know we can use the low pass option if we need it. In order to use the compensatory option, the student had to get at least a 55 on math and ELA or appeal that to a 52. So this student did achieve a 55 on math and ELA. So we know we can use the low pass. Now we want to know, can we use the compensatory option? So in fact, this 68, because that's considered that 65 or better, that can compensate right here for the 46 on global. Okay, so this student, when you look at these Regents exam scores, 55, 62, 46, 64, they are leaving high school with a local diploma because they've used all of the well, they didn't use the appeals, but they used the low pass safety net option and the compensatory safety net option in order to achieve that local diploma. Now, I keep saying local diploma because again, that is not it does not have the Regent seal. But what I want to share with you is our students are taking all of the rigor of those Regents classes, and the safety nets are on that final Regents exam. So a lot of people will ask me, what is the difference between the Regents endorsed diploma and a local diploma? And really, there isn't a difference. The student took all of the same rigor of the classwork. It's just, again, they had the safety nets as a student with a disability. And I always like to give the example, although it was years and years ago, I graduated in New York State, locally here in Central New York, with a Regents diploma. My husband graduated from a parochial school downstate in New York State. He does not have a Regents diploma, even though he did take some Regents classes because he was in public schools for 1 year. He was at a parochial school. So his diploma is a local diploma. We both went to Lemoyne College. We both got jobs after school that required a high school diploma. So I just want to kind of share that with you. You know, I don't want you to feel like the local diploma doesn't hold as much weight. Because it really does. Again, as you see, the student had to do the rigor of the Regents classes. It's just that we're using the safety nets on those Regents exams. And then this is just giving you the rationale. So when you get this, these PowerPoint slides, you'll kind of have the rationale. Now, there is one more way that a student with an IEP could achieve a local diploma, even if, let me go back for a second, this scenario doesn't work for them, okay? And that's called the superintendent determination option. So I'm gonna kind of go through each of these columns just to help you understand it. So this is available only to a student with an active IEP, not a student with a 504, not a student that has been declassified. So this is only if the student has a current active IEP. They have participated in and passed all of the relevant Regents coursework. So those 22 credits and electives, they've been engaged in those classes, they've passed the class. They have actively participated in all of the required Regents exams. So they've taken the Regents exams, but maybe we're not able to get a 55, a 52, or even a 45. They earned the 22 credits and electives. And this is the last piece on the far right-hand side where you see like the little email picture. The only way that the superintendent at Syracuse City can use this determination option is upon written request by the parent or a person in parental relationship to the student. So again, I want to say that again, just to be clear for all of the parents on the call tonight. If this is an option you need to use for your student, the only way that the superintendent will look into this is if you give written consent or written request for this. And I'll tell you why that is. When this option first came out in 2017 as an emergency rule near the end of that 2016-17 school year, automatically the state said you have to look at every kid's transcripts, and if they can pass based on this superintendent determination option, then they get to graduate from high school. The problem is, if you remember, we've talked about students with a disability can stay in school until they're 21 and work on all of those post-secondary transition planning and continue to take coursework if they did not achieve a diploma yet, right? So the minute you request the superintendent determination option and it's approved, that student has received their local diploma and their free appropriate public education ends, whether they're 18, 19, 20, right? So that's why now it's on the parent to request this in writing. If we as parents don't request this in writing, then the school district does not have to consider this option and the student stays in school continuing to work, okay? So what this option basically means is it's kind of twofold. If your student scored at least a 55 on their math and ELA, okay, so that's one of the caveats or one of the criteria to use the superintendent determination. The student has to get at least a 55 on math and ELA Regents exam, or appeal it down to that grade of a 52 that we discussed with the safety net. Then I don't care if on science and the 2 social studies, they could get a 33 on the Regents exam. If they've passed the class and they've met that criteria, we're going to use the superintendent determination option to give them a local diploma. Okay, that's option 1. Option 2 is if the student, so the student with an IEP, was able to earn the CDOS commencement credential. Okay, so now they've worked on their diploma and the CDOS credential at the same time, then they do not have to achieve that 55 on math and ELA. They could literally get, let's say, a 38 on every Regents exam. If they have the CDOS commencement credential as a companion to their diploma, then the superintendent determination option can be used upon parent request or written request. And that student could leave high school with a local diploma. All of the other safety nets need to be exhausted first. So if the student was able to achieve through those safety nets a local diploma, we don't care about the superintendent determination option. This is when the student was not able to achieve those passing grades that they needed with the safety nets. So I give an example who I feel like this is for. This is for that student who has passed, again, they have to pass the classes. So we're not saying that they don't know the material, because in order to pass the class and earn all of those 22 credits and electives, you need to know the material. This is for those kids that aren't good test takers. I have one of those kids myself right now, right? He does pretty well if he studies for, 4 weeks and then takes a test. But then all of a sudden at the end of the year, when he's got to remember everything from September, that's much harder, even with the extra support. So this is, again. Oh,
I interject right there.
yes,
I
absolutely.
just want to make sure that Julie's question might have been answered. I've been listening and I think you touched on it, and I want to make sure Julie's question is answered. What if child receives all A's for all 4 marking periods, but struggles with test regions due to anxiety?
Mm-hmm. So
So
again, yep. So and am I making the assumption that that student has an IEP?
I don't have the
Yes.
capacity
Yes.
to.
Okay, I heard yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
So that student has an IEP, exactly. So that student has passed all of the classes. So again, as the parent, you could request the superintendent determination option. And then the only thing would be that student would have to get at least a 55 on math and ELA unless they've also earned their CDOS commencement credential. But that student could have the chance to earn that local diploma. Does that help, Julie?
Yes.
Okay, great. And feel free, don't ever hesitate to reach out to me individually to talk more about your child's specifics. I'm happy to do that. Okay, so everything I've talked about so far is all about achieving that diploma, whether it's a Regents or a local diploma. Okay, then we have 2 non-diploma credentials that are credentials that could be a student's exiting credential if they are New York State alternate assessed, or any student, general education students with and without IEPs can earn the CDOS commencement credential. These credentials are tied to these career universal foundation skills that we reviewed last week. Okay, so I'm going to kind of go past those just in order to conserve time. So first off, I want to talk about the Career Development Occupational Studies Commencement Credential, or what we refer to as the CDOS, CDOS Commencement Credential, or CDOS CC. So there's 2 ways that this credential can be used, and there's also 2 ways that it can be earned, because it needs to be earned. So the student that is earning the CDOS Commencement Credential is that student who is working towards a diploma as well. It's a parallel path. So they're working on those 22 credits and electives. They're passing the 4 required exams or using the safety nets and using their +1. And they've completed all of the requirements for the CDOS commencement credential. So they are actually graduating high school with either a Regents or a local diploma and a CDOS commencement credential, which documents entry-level job capabilities, or they should be competent to receive an entry-level job, is what the CDOS commencement credential states. Now, it sometimes may also be used, again, for any student, not just students with disabilities, as their standalone exiting credential. And when I say exiting credential, I say the word exiting because that is a student who, for whatever reason, maybe didn't pass all of the 22 credits and electives, so was not able to achieve either a Regents or a local diploma. But all for naught, because that student has been working towards developing employment skills, career skills through the CDOS commencement credential. So now when they exit high school, whether it's at age 18, 19, or 21, they have a certificate that says they are entry-level job ready, and they have proof and documentation to show that. So, and oh, good. Okay. It's only 5:38. I still have some time. I could see my husband's clock in his office, and it's fast. And I'm like, oh my God, it's almost 1:15, but it's not. He's like, always has to be 10 minutes ahead. Okay. So CDOS commencement credential, how can students earn this? All right. And this is where you're going to be talking with your students' teachers as well as your school counselors. They have to have a career plan, and I'll review that with you. They have to have an employability profile that they are going to be creating from their work-based learning opportunities. They have to show that they're demonstrating achievement in those CDOS standards that we looked at before. Remember, it was technology, reading, writing, interpersonal skills, management skills, personal qualities. Student must work towards 216 hours of CTE coursework and or work-based learning. Now, a lot of you parents are probably saying work-based learning, that was like so 2 years ago, because with COVID, it's been so hard to incorporate a lot of that outside work-based learning, right? We're slowly getting back into that. But the student, in order to achieve the CDOS commencement credential, must have a minimum of 54 hours of work-based learning. So let me show you what that might look like. First of all, the career plan. So the student should be starting the CDOS commencement credential as a pathway if they want to use it as a pathway, but just in regards to earning it, they can start that in 9th grade. So they're reviewing in 9th grade all of the different CDOS skills. Maybe they're taking part in a CTE class. They're working on some work-based learning opportunities. So hopefully we're expanding all of those 216 hours over 4 or 5 years of high school so that we're not cramming it all into 1 year and like holding our breath to see if they're going to achieve that. So the career plan should be done annually during their high school years, and it should be updated based upon their strengths, preference, interests, or needs, or that word SPIN. Then we have what's called the employability profile. The student, in order to achieve the CDOS commencement credential, must have at least one employability profile. Some students may have more than one because they maybe were in different work-based learning experiences and different lines of work. So maybe culinary, automotive, groundskeeping. So they might have an employability profile for each of those work-based learning experiences because they were trying to learn and figure out which experiences was their preference or their strength. So career plan, employability profile are required. And then again, as I said, those 216 hours of CTE coursework with a minimum of 54 work-based learning hours, right? So those are a lot of the CTE. If your students are engaged in CTE courses right now, they're probably very close to earning the majority of the requirements they need to earn the CDOS commencement credential, right? So they have to meet all of these requirements in order to earn that. Again, they can use the CDOS commencement credential as their +1 pathway, or as just a companion to their diploma, or as that exiting credential. There is also an option 2, and I know in Syracuse City, sometimes you use this option 2 as well. So option 2 would be that if the student isn't able to achieve all of those 216 hours and they cannot get in all of those work-based learning hours, there are certain department approved courses that can help a student achieve the CDOS commencement credential. The student would have to pass one of these final exams. And Iristina, I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute because I